pleasant dreams are always interrupted by the taking up of duties. Morning arrived to find more questions than answers. Coming around to finally being upright, I took a leisurely pace towards the stairs and on towards breakfast. The staff seemed surprised at my being up and about, and they promptly put out placings and began service. Nothing spectacular, but my enjoyment of the meal increased as I was finally taking it at a table rather than from my bedside. The coffee proved surprisingly refreshing. I took my mug out towards the cabin's porch and was surprised at how dim the light was, given the fact that it was morning. While it was in fact morning, the dimness was the result of an artificial cause. Stepping out from the porch and turning upwards, I was greeted by that cause. A Zeppelin, another wonder that our advanced science had produced. Many credit the French with balloon transport, but we all knew that the practical and effective air transport was a German innovation. The thing loomed in the air above the camp, several hundred meters in length, tethered to iron stakes and sandbags from the corners of the settlement. The gondola and enclosed viewports reflected the light and gave the impression of a shining star against the dark, grey backdrop of the cylindrical balloon. The shouts of men and the trod of bootfalls eclipsed me, and many came running to shake my hand and offer assistance in my journey to the telegraph office. I suppose it had been some time since I had been seen, and I wasn't sure that the medicals had disclosed to the men that I had recovered from my brawl with the Saracen successfully. A couple of the chaps took great interest in my scar and seemed to wish for their own, as it was a known fact that the fairer sex found such injuries appealing. I insisted that I would be just fine on my journey to the telegraph office. It became obvious that command had taken it up themselves to answer communications addressed to me while I recovered, and I would need to check in to make sure that nothing was left outstanding. The personnel there greeted me warmly, but had nothing to hand to me. Perhaps that was for the best. On my way out, a fellow came from around the corner and approached. Trim, well-groomed, coarse brown hair concealed by a derby hat.
Your Majesty, it is good to see you well.
I appreciate your concern, Mr.
Bombach, Gerhard Bombach. A pleasure.
Indeed. Are you affiliated with the contractors? I would have recalled your face if I had seen it during our descent.
I'm afraid I arrived recently amongst the delivery of U-45 just last week. I had hoped to find you and discuss some matters privately.
I will have to hand that matter to my secretaries, and they would be able to find some time. He produced from his coat pocket the dreaded bronze badge. Reichspost agent.
It was my hope that we could have a discussion in a more private environment, Your Majesty.
As you wish. We walked down the road and past Diesel's tent. Some terrible heat and the scent of molten iron drifted past us as we maneuvered. It was early enough that there wouldn't be any men at the practice range. Seemed like a suitable environment for a discussion or an interrogation. What do the servants of the Minister-President need from me, exactly? He had placed his badge back into his coat and now produced a small note. Black wax seal with the Abteilung 3B symbol pressed within.
I'm afraid that His Majesty had been indelicate in certain matters, and our intervention was requested by His Majesty's grandfather to ensure that scandal does not rack the royal household.
I opened the note, and within, photographs. My indiscretions with Sintra made manifest. How these could have been taken without my notice was beyond me. You must know, then, that I killed a man for attempting to take photos similar to these.
Again, I'm afraid that we have been able to document that indiscretion as well. His Majesty's grandfather is remarkably understanding. He only wishes the best for you, and would have you suffer no consequences, so long as our investigation is completed and His Majesty takes the action requested of him.
Perhaps, then, you should spend more time down in this place. Men go missing down here far too frequently. You might be the next.
I might, but then another of my colleagues will take my place and our investigations and activities will continue, just as they have before and after. I followed Your Majesty's little trail, and that fellow over there, leaning against the fence post in the laboratory coat, followed me. Our organization is a circle of accountability.
I crumpled the note into my fist. I knew better than to discard it openly. It would have to be burned. It wouldn't do me any good anyway. 3B always makes copies and records. I pondered the feasibility of sending some of my cohort to the surface to set fire to their offices, but I knew it would be impossible. Resignation to the facts of the matter overtook me. What is it that you require from me, Mr. Bombach, if that is your real name?
It is, Your Majesty. We pride ourselves in our honesty and loyalty to the crown.
He paused and bid me follow him further down the range, towards the berm.
His Majesty's grandfather has asked for one thing only. You must dispose of the primitive. We have so far been able to intercept any communications made from the common soldiery and officers that would have given away your game. Berlin is a tight, interconnected network of babbling mouths. Eventually, His Majesty's family, and more importantly, perhaps His Majesty's beautiful wife, would have become apprised of his indiscretions. You must end this dalliance, and you must then ensure that the primitive is not able to return to your side.
I became flushed and considered disposing of this fellow in the alternative. I felt anger at a variety of different people. Grandfather, for permitting this up-jumped bureaucrat to dictate terms and orders to me. 3B, for not even having the decency to leave my own correspondence alone. Perhaps mostly, I felt anger at myself. It was my base urges that gave rise to this impasse. I knew what the consequences would be if my dalliances were discovered, and I proceeded anyway. In truth, I had no one to blame but myself. Have you ever loved a woman, Mr. Baumbach?
I have a lovely wife and 2 daughters in Posen.
Have you ever thought about what you would be willing to give up to ensure that they remained at your side?
Has His Majesty ever thought that his improprieties might cause damage to more than just his relations with his lawful wife?
Unlike with Moltke, I refrained from striking this fellow. The magisterial power that my birth accorded me, even in our country, could be restrained by the threats of disinheritance. One fault in our system that the French government lacked. Would grandfather truly permit it, though? I pondered the matter. It would be difficult to find a replacement. Little Wilhelm was far too young to be accorded the rights of the crown. Is there a deadline on this little assignment you've given me?
So long as it is done before you return to Berlin, His Majesty's grandfather will be satisfied.
Perhaps I'll never return to Berlin. How about that? Speak sense, Wilhelm. You can't dodge this bullet. Is there anything else you require?
No, sir. I will be making my way upwards this evening. I shall hope to see you on a better occasion, Your Majesty. You are the hope of the nation.
I had no response. He walked back towards the centre of town while I pondered my malfeasance. As the scales weighed in my mind between my duty to my nation and my love of that savage rose that I had come to love, the solution became obvious. My tenure in this place would continue for some time. I resolved to enjoy every last minute of it. My compliance with grandfather's request that this dalliance end would be satisfied. But not yet. First, we had a matter to resolve with our airborne enemy. Within the linen confines of the command tent, I found a reason to escape my spiraling anxiety at the thought of losing Sintra. Moltke, Tirpitz, Diesel and the rest of the officers stood and gave a round of applause as I entered. For once I appreciated it. I was told later that they had taken a grave concern with my health during my recovery. In any case, it appeared that my request of Moltke had been fulfilled. Dozens of charts and maps were laid about the tables, and as I took my seat at the head of the largest one, he rose and began his briefing.
It is good to see you well, Your Majesty. You fought like a lion against that Saracen.
Thank you, Major General. Don't let me interrupt your briefing.
Much obliged. Gentlemen, we have been tasked by the Prince to engage in a punitive expedition against the primitives that attacked our camp some time ago. Having now seen them off twice during our time in this strange place, we have full confidence that we will succeed. We now know of the extent of their armament and their monstrous cohorts, and we are ready to engage them on our own terms.
Moltke gestured towards a chalkboard behind him and began drawing a rudimentary representation of our location and the enemy stalactite city.
A portion of the 5th Corps, around 15,000 men, will take up a march column along the road that rings this body of water, which we now know is called the Neo-Tethys. We will be accompanied by Krupp batteries number 3 through number 10, the Walking Engine Brigade, and you may have noticed the contribution from our air arm floating above our humble settlement. On board are specialists in the art of aerial combat and personnel trained in the demolition of infrastructure, largely men of the pioneer regiments who have spent time in the Alpines. Their skills will be necessary for the completion of our task. Our task, that is simple. We will blast this scourge out of its rocky hiding place and force them to ground themselves for easy destruction by our forces. Dragoons have marked the safest paths to traverse the stalactite, which, to our surprise, does in fact have ground access.
Moltke took the chalk and drew a channel between the stalactite, now labelled Arum, and a large cave to the northwest that ran along the canals of New Kirkwall.
The English, while having a measure of rapport with these primitives, have expressed a desire to remove the Azata from the path of their expansion, which, according to our sources, would overlap the current space occupied by our enemy. Thus they have made access to this cave, proximate to their city's canal, open to us. We will march a portion of our contingent through the cave, which will lead into the body of the stalactite just here. Reconnaissance efforts over the last week have revealed a large grouping of primitives situated directly below their hanging city. The body of our force will surround them and annihilate them with sustained fire from our batteries. Survivors will be forced to flee into large urban structures that seem largely comprised of stone and act as a logistical between the ground and their city. It will be at this point that our specialists will come into action.
He outlined a series of cross marks across the top of the stalactite.
Our engineers will place charges across the circumference of the hanging rock formation. Our studies indicate that once our forces begin the assault on the ground, a majority of the enemy will vacate the structure in an effort to repel us, leaving few forces behind to interfere with our specialists' critical task. It will take several hours and the use of the dirigible to reach the spots of weakness pinpointed by the survey teams. Once it is done, our forces will draw back a distance of 1 kilometer to ensure safety, and the specialists in their craft should clear the radius of danger to detonate the charges remotely. According to our estimations, the blast should be sufficient to bring the entirety of the structure crashing down on top of them.
Jesus Christ.
Once this is done, and the considerable cloud of dust that will result is cleared, 1st and 4th regiments will traipse through the rubble and eliminate further resistance. We set off in 48 hours. This will bring the harassment of the enemy to an appropriate end. Just as we did with the apes that resided where we stand, gentlemen, our forces will take up this enemy root and stem. Are there any questions?
A silence pervaded the room. Moltke's plans seemed well thought out. He had 2 entire weeks to prepare. He requisitioned an entire dirigible for this purpose. I would have to ask him how he got the damn thing down here, eventually. Kirchbach was the first to pipe up.
If we encounter resistance in the cave you discussed, how are we to overcome it?
Diesel's engines will lead the way, followed by assault groups and 3rd and 5th regiments.
If they surrender, what is the rule of engagement?
Do you expect them to surrender?
It seems unlikely, but anything is possible.
Moltke stood silent for a moment, and then gave a resounding response.
These primitives have harassed our column, inhibited the progress of our mission, attacked our encampment, and have caused the deaths of 36 of our men. They are lacking in civilized manners and will be shown none. There will be no quarter for them. If they yield to us, take captives, those who resist will be subject to shot and shell. Any other questions, gentlemen?
Everyone amongst us seemed satisfied with that answer. I understood their complicity with what many would characterize as a bloodthirsty order. These primitives are at home in this place, and presumably can replace their losses 2 or 3-fold faster than we can replace our own. A decisive strike would inevitably be necessary. I preserved some hope, if not for their sake, but for Sintra's, that her people would yield, and we need not take the Canaanite approach. We adjourned. The murmurs between the officers intensified and deviated. Some assuredly wished to follow Moltke's order of no quarter to its appropriate conclusion. Others considered that the condemnation of so many souls would be needless, and yearned for the primitives to give way in the face of our arms. Some simply wondered if the rules of engagement would be adhered to under the stress of combat. These are men we fight after all. They must have women, evidenced by Sintra, and children, presumably among them. What would be done with them when we succeeded? I pushed the thought from my mind and took lunch. I saw that little rat Bombach load into a carriage headed north. Watching from the window, I considered the extent to which his organization's assets had infiltrated our forces. It was understandable, the distrust the French had of us during our journey to this place. The distrust of our own government was something else. Resolving to send a telegram to grandfather to clarify the issue, I entered the communications office and asked the men other than the attendant to vacate the building, insisting that my message needed to remain private. They understood and complied with my request. Dearest grandfather, it has become known to me that you desire for me to leave behind some playthings I have acquired here. As your grandson and servant of the nation, I shall do so. I do wish to say that I am quite saddened by your lack of trust in the heir presumptive. When I came to this new world just months ago, it appeared as though you had the full confidence in me that you had in father during the wars of unification. In exchange, then, for my compliance with your request, I ask that you desist with your dispatch of spies to infiltrate our ranks. Bismarck's man Bombach made it clear to me that this infiltration had taken place long before we journeyed beneath the earth. This prompts me to wonder if you trust me to assume and properly bear the crown of our nation. If you cannot trust me with the trivial matter of supervising an effort of colonization, I wistfully remember my childhood, when you and father both beamed at me and stated that trust was a building block of our family and our nation. I do not wish those blocks to become eroded and have our foundation collapse beneath us. My love and prayers thus extend to our whole family, and I wish for you to consider my request with the gravity that it deserves. Your dutiful grandson, William. Sent without issue, apparently. With that matter attended to, time came for lunch. I asked for Diesel to join me, as Moltke, Tirpitz, and the remainder of the command scuttled away to begin preparations for the upcoming mission. The staff prepared schnitzel. While not a favorite of mine, it proved effective enough at staving off hunger, and gave me an excuse to discuss the events of the last 2 weeks with a non-military mind. We broke out a Riesling, which brought together my preference for our own nation's fare and Diesel's preference for wine. We sat and dined, and after a while he began his own little briefing.
I must say that the gifts His Majesty received from the Greeks are fascinating.
Far be it from me to prevent you from playing with rocks, Mr. Diesel.
Has Your Majesty not been apprised of our recent discoveries?
Not as of yet. I didn't bring you here just to share a sweet wine and some dry chicken.
Well, I suppose the greatest discovery has been of a metallurgical nature. The ores are easy to melt but difficult to form. When we are successful at manipulating it, it creates a light, tensile metal with a strength similar to rolled steel.
You've shared this discovery with your employer.
Alfred has known for some time. We had some samples from earlier sojourns, but not enough to be used in applied experiments.
Was a wagon load not enough for you this time around?
It absolutely was. I would like to demonstrate if you wish.
By all means. Diesel brought in a small model of a strange-looking craft, something airborne, by its similarity to a bird. I had seen too many photographs of fools who believed that they could strap wings to themselves and take flight from a running leap, so it was something of a relief when Diesel declined to follow in that fashion. He set the model on the table, a single set of wings with a tail like a fish, a naval propeller placed at the nose. Interesting little thing. Perhaps he has a future in the manufacture of children's toys. And this is what, exactly?
Powered flight in form.
Interesting.
We had often pondered the possibilities of heavier-than-air flight. Word is that the French and Americans are making progress using wood and canvas gliders and kites. You've seen, I'm sure, the photographs of the Austrians and their own frames.
Indeed.
Steel-bodied craft are currently impossible, due to the weight of the materials that overcome the lift made possible by our engines. With metals like this, light and strong, the possibilities are endless.
I'm happy for you, Herr Diesel. We finished the bottle, and I took the little model in my hands. Outside, I could see Heinrich pouring, or to be more accurate, mucusing, the window. I felt for him. Now that we had taken up permanent residence, he had been out of a job. I will have to find something new for him to do. The men enjoyed his presence, and had come to see him as a talisman of good luck. Later, though, as I had a mission with this little plaything the engineers had given me, desiring to see if Diesel was putting on a show, I went upstairs to the window and hurled the model like a clubroom dart. To my surprise, it sailed from the window in a straight path for some distance, before gracefully coming to a landing in a grassy patch on the other side of the settlement's gate. We truly have a team of visionaries amongst us. I only hope that he emerges from this new world alive and ready to grace our nation with their gifts. Diesel adjourned back to his residence, now a proper cabin, and presumably resumed whatever work he had abandoned to afford the time to dine with me. Since my medical absence, so to say, a considerable load of paperwork had accumulated on my desk, mostly internal affairs, but some things from our English and French neighbors. A dossier containing logistical fulfillments from our submarine routes. Examined. Request to approve a new route of travel for our scouts. Approved. A courtly invitation to another gala with the governor at New Kirkwall. Respectfully declined. As I worked through the papers, Heinrich reappeared at my window, his glassy black eyes almost absorbing the full light from my lantern and beginning to dissolve into the darkness of the late evening. I opened the door for him and bade him enter. He followed me into my office and remained still as I took a seat. Although I'm sure a doorman from the foot guards would be a more effective method of protection, I appreciated his quietness as I went over each dispatch. I had taken to reading through the papers with a strict process. In my good hand, I held the letter to the lantern light, discerning its contents and judging its merits before deciding how best to respond. In my left, I formed a crooked grip around the well of melted wax, lifting carefully and pouring a measure out onto a new envelope, before pressing my signet ring across the pool of carmine adhesive. Heinrich seemed to be watching with a curious fascination, and as I set one letter down and took another up, he widened his taloned grasp and held out his arm. "Is there something you need, friend?"
Blub.
"Is it this?" I handed over the little basin of wax to him, and he kept a close hold of it as I read the letter. When I had finished, I placed it down onto the desk, folded it, and placed it in an envelope. Wonders never cease. As I did, Heinrich took the wax, poured it over the flap of the envelope in tight measure, and I pressed my seal just as I had done a dozen times by now. Butler and secretary now. Soon enough, I'll have him answering my phone calls and telegrams. If only he could speak our language. The brass basin that held the wax now bore a thin coating of slime, but that didn't offend me more than the relief it gave to not have to use both hands to pass through the pending business. After a couple more repetitions of this bizarre process, the pile was reduced to a neat stack of answers, approvals, and denials, all sealed and ready for the postmaster. I heard a knock at the door, and now reticent to grant permission without knowing the identity of the entrant following the escapade with Sintra and Donia 2 weeks ago. I rose and opened the door.
Prince?
"Sintra, what brings you to me?"
Questions.
"Ask them."
Prince want to talk in front of him?
She made a side eye at Heinrich.
Blub.
"He doesn't speak our language. No harm in it."
He listen and know more than Prince thinks.
I looked at him. Just as in the tent on our first meeting some months ago, a vacant stare occupied those black, round eyes, featuring only a reflection of the gas lantern's light within. He had that propensity for imitation, true, but it never crossed my mind to believe that he was taking in more information than he should. He had been following the officers and the men closely these last months. Darwin's theories be damned, for Heinrich was the best example of a contradiction, human in shape but animal in mind. Before my time recuperating, someone from the scientific contingent expressed a desire to dissect him to gain some knowledge of his anatomy, and an artilleryman from battery number 5 followed that anorak from his tent and beat him above the head until he withdrew his proposal. The men liked Heinrich. I liked Heinrich, but we knew next to nothing about him. Should we treat all fish as spies down here? He is a friend. Speak your mind. Pay no attention to him.
Prince wants revenge for Yazata attack?
Not just Prince. Whole army.
Army wants revenge. Yazata want peace.
If Yazata want peace, why did they attack?
Honor test.
Your father's herald says we failed again. Once on the road, and a second time here not 2 weeks ago.
You can pass if you try.
I tried. That Saracen almost made me give my life trying. I am done trying. I am now doing.
Doing what?
Finishing what your people started. Before she could open her mouth in retort, an adjutant from the telegraph office made an appearance at the window in a sly fashion. Perhaps his superiors wanted a laugh, or perhaps he was instructed to deliver my correspondence discreetly. In any case, I opened the window and took hold of the message. Unfurling it, I sat back down and took a quick glance. Dispatch from the palace. Could it truly be that grandfather replied this quickly? Now I yearned to find out. I took my letter opener and broke that seal. It read as follows.
Dearest William, I hope all is well with you, and with 5th Corps. Your mother and father are concerned with your absence during the course of this great undertaking. Donna reports that you fare well, and we believe her. I received your telegram. You should write more often. I looked into the matter at your request. Neither I nor the Minister-President, and you should really address him as Chancellor, now directed that intelligence assets be integrated into your company. I asked that Count Bismarck examine the rosters of our intelligence units in the field. I fear that there is no Gerhard Bombach among them. The family continues to worry that your stay in that strange place is affecting your mind. Please, when you get a chance, come and pay a visit to us in Charlottenburg. It has become so lifeless up here without your presence. I yearn to take brandy and discuss your adventure in detail. Your loving grandfather, His Imperial Highness, Wilhelm I, by the grace of God.
I quickly stuffed the note into my pocket and reached for the photographs that Bombach, or whoever the hell he was, gave to me this morning. I reached for it, and it wasn't there. Sweat began to drip off of me. Guard!
Yes, sir?
Bring me the dossiers from all U-boat resupply manifests from the last 2 weeks. There was a carriage that left for New Kirkwall this morning. Did it arrive?
I'll look into it, Your Majesty.
Look into it now, goddammit! He ran from the room, over to the command tent, and then to the telegraph station. Sintra spoke up and asked something, but the blood thundering in my ears made it impossible to hear her. Heinrich spoke now. Heinrich spoke! Those crude black eyes turned to me, that gas lantern flickering rapidly. His face, normally vacant, contorted into a vicious grin, those wide, sharp teeth that he had shined out, mucus-coated lips, twisted, and those red, fleshy gum lines now exposed themselves. I couldn't look away.
All the world above and below will know that you alone bear the burden.
I reached for my sidearm when I woke up. A dream. Another nightmare. I was sitting in front of my desk. Sintra was helping straighten my neck, and Heinrich continued to stand in the corner, stoic as those Greeks we met. I rifled through my breast pocket and brushed Sintra's hands away. Grandfather's telegram was still there. No photographs. What the hell is going on? When had I lost consciousness? Sintra, take me to my bed.
Oh, Prince, how naughty.
I ignored her salaciousness for a moment and gave a grave stare at Heinrich. I looked deep into those black, inky pits on the sides of his head. For a fraction of a second, that light from the lantern flickered out of existence, and a shadow bubbled out from his eyes. I've been up all night attending to business. I've had 3 bottles of wine since lunch. I haven't slept properly in 2 weeks. I'm working under more stress than most men can reasonably imagine. That's it. Just a bout of fits. Narcolepsy, perhaps. Father suffered from that on occasion. Nothing to worry about. Sintra helped me up the stairs, and I found relief in loosening my shirt collar and reclining. It must have been past midnight, as the lanterns in the telegraph office had been extinguished. While a part of me yearned to find that guard and see if he had ascertained Bombach's whereabouts and recovered the records of our resupply, I needed to sleep. I needed to sleep. I needed Sintra, and I had her. Afterwards, I sat and chewed on the end of a cigarette, its slowly burning end the only illumination in my chamber. The winds in this place continually passed through the open window, soothed my aching mind and overwarmed body. Sintra lay next to me, satisfied. I was so deep in thought that when she tapped my shoulder in an effort to get me to pass her my smoke, I ignored her. Returning to myself, I yielded and passed it over to her.
Prince will be conqueror twice over.
Prince will be murderer twice over, you mean?
No. Prince say in war you kill the enemy. Prince is right.
I hope so. The next day proceeded in the same fashion as the last. Breakfast, briefing, discussion, loading wagons for departure, lunch, meeting with Diesel, long scientific discussion, telegrams and letters, dinner, Sintra, bed. Nothing out of the ordinary. I found myself questioning everything I was doing. That guard that I yelled for last night came to me after dinner. Behind the closed doors of my office, he stated that an abandoned carriage had been found on the road to the English settlement. The driver was killed by strangulation and pulled into the bushes several meters off of the path. No Bombach. He reviewed the cargo and passenger dossiers from the U-boat manifest. No Bombach. If we had the time, I would instigate a comprehensive lockdown of the settlement. and proceed with a security sweep and spy hunt, but Moltke's maneuver demanded all attention available. We would deal with that burning concern of mine in due time. For the moment, preparations needed to be made, and they were made. And just as in the Bible, in the book of Proverbs, when God took up the cause of the Canaanites and bid them force the heathens from the promised land, we made ready for war. The day of stepping off was a matter of routine. At this point, it almost seems to make the men joyful to have something to do that wasn't schlepping water or construction materials from one end of the settlement to the other. Some of their comrades that would remain here in the rear guard were almost mournful at being denied a chance to get a grip on the enemy. Just as before, our victor would come, but we did not yet know the cost. Formation took up most of the morning, our best men laden with the gear and eager to get on the road. Diesel's engines, topped up on fuel, polished and scrubbed of rust. Our Zeppelin, laden with explosive charges and swarmed with our demolitionists and pioneers. Nothing left to do, no stone left unturned. Time to step off. No bands this time, no potential for warning to the enemy. We moved as Diesel's machines do, marching in tight, disciplined order towards our objective. Moltke and I shared a carriage this time. His Lipizana was left stabled in the settlement. He cared for the horse better than I've seen him treat some of the men, hand-feeding apples and carrots and all that. I understood his impulse to leave it behind. Not really an opportune target of a cavalry charge, a hanging city. God forbid it gets hit in the engagement. If one had thought that Moltke had a temper when he learned of the Yazata's special relationship with the French, Christ only knows what vengeance he would reap upon a people responsible for killing his prized horse. I knew that this would end in tragedy. Not for us, certainly. We were prepared for every eventuality. That was the Major General's strong point. No, the tragedy would befall the enemy. We are that tragedy, marching towards our victim. To my gratitude, our agents removed the carriage that would have otherwise blocked the roadway. Whomever, or perhaps whatever it was that killed its driver and drove me towards the precipice of madness, its time would come soon. During the drive, I review some of the material provided to me by Colonel Gray's son. I had reviewed it some time ago, but much of the critical information had gone unused since our last encounter with the Yazata. It seemed prudent. As the Oriental scholar Sun Tzu once ascribed, know your enemy and you will win the battle. Few people know the other half of the maxim, know yourself and you will win the war. I felt confidence in my knowledge of the latter. Now, all that needed to be done was to refresh my memory on my knowledge of the former. Indeed, just as Sintra had described, they are a tribal confederation. Some historians would surely later draw comparisons to pre-Roman Gaul. Once a ragged patchwork of petty kingdoms that laid claim to different areas of the cavernous ceiling and stalactite settlements. That dotted this layer. They have begun to assemble into a centralized government, nominally controlled by an elected figurehead. It was unclear whether the position that Sintra's father occupied was this figurehead, or if he was simply a chief of one of the more dominant tribes. They are plunderers and raiders. Movable goods are their primary quandary. They steal anything that is not bolted down, and conduct themselves much like pirates. Their craft ply the skies, and they claim dominion over all beneath them. Social cues dictate that those on the ground will always be lesser than those who can take flight. Their propensity towards enslaving persons whom they believe to be their lessers is noted. However, the practice of manumission of well-behaved slaves had been noted. They rely on a combination of mercenary forces and their own men to defend their settlements. Boys become men once they learn to ride the backs of the flying creatures that they domesticate for use in war and for labor-intensive projects. Women, if exceptionally fierce or of a high status, may do the same, but in large part they are relegated to the care of the home and maintenance of the hearths, while the menfolk conduct raids. I continued reading. They follow a traditional family structure, similar to our own. They have nobles and commoners. Marriage between the classes is a matter of scandal, but has been noted in their own records, and the records of those lucky enough to be privy to their history. They develop strong bonds with their creatures, who become part of the family in turn. Honor is held in high regard, and offenses given between men are resolved with combat or contract. Their children remain in their settlements until the time comes for them to take up a profession. As would be expected, those responsible for tending to their creatures are accorded great fame, nearly as much as those warriors who are successful in the act of plunder. Possession of individual property relies on the ability of one to take physical custody, rather than by customary arrangement or understanding. When attacked by a foreign foe, they will first send their menfolk astride their flying lizards. If this proves insufficient, they take up a defensive posture and force the enemy to engage in an ingress into their settlements. Attempts to besiege their stalactite cities, when performed by other denizens of the deep, have largely been unsuccessful. The concentration of their industry and agriculture into great cavern complexes within the rock formation limits the ability of an enemy force to starve them out. However, under sufficient pressure, they will send the women and children out with rudimentary weapons in an effort to defend their cities. Only at 3 points in their history has this occurred, and each is noted as a great cataclysm in their chronicles. Such an action by a foreign power denotes them as the Azata's most hated enemy, and will compel other sky clans to come to their defense, if able. If not, other clans will band together and commit to an eternal conflict between them and the foe. I hope Moltke read through this material before putting together his plan. I elected to put away the dossier before I lost hope in our cause, and before I became sick in the Daimler's cabin. Reading while seated in a carriage does tend to bring one's last meal upwards. On the matter of things upwards, the shadow cast by our dirigible gave a nice measure of shade for the men as we continued along the road. This first day would bring us just short of New Kirkwall. We had started off early enough in the morning to cut down a 3-day march to 2 days. It appeared as though the men were eager enough to march double time, but Moltke and I both knew better than to tire them immediately prior to an engagement. We stopped for lunch and picnicked near that white, sandy beach where we had stopped during our departure from the English settlement some time ago. It seems almost a lifetime has passed since our descent, but everything appeared just as I remembered it. Perhaps that is the strangest thing about this place. All of the great powers of the world endeavoring to make their mark on this new world, but all the while it sits and waits in silence, never changing. One might expect man's machinations to simply be washed away by some unknown force of nature, and this place would return to its natural state. I bit into the pretzel and had to dislodge its remnants from my back teeth with my tongue. Now missing a molar, this had become routine after several days of meals, but it nonetheless was a reminder that this place had already taken something from me. It would take more before the end. Moltke poured a coffee for himself while we sat, and opined on the nature of the punitive expedition.
Has His Majesty reviewed the intelligence documents to his satisfaction?
I suppose so. As of their attack on our march down, and their attack on the settlement, there remains to be seen anything that we have not yet encountered.
Has your compatriot voiced protest against our mission?
No. Actually, she seems strangely supportive. This seemed to baffle him.
The primitives so often lose loyalty to their own when presented with the benefits of civilization.
I tend to agree. She's learned more of our language. She has been shorn of the plant fiber wrappings and war paint. Her adaptation to our culture has been remarkable.
Perhaps we should send for an anthropologist to better study her and her people.
Or what will be left of them once this is done?
I suspect that we will not be able to completely root them out.
Now this baffled me. You lack confidence in your own planning? Wasn't their destruction our objective?
Your Majesty, the pomp and rhetoric that mission briefings inspire in me does not give an accurate picture of reality. Officers enjoy hearing that kind of thing because it gives them a reason on which to believe in our success.
Perhaps, if you ever feel a need to return to private life, you should take up work in advertising. He snorted.
Just as we did with those 8 men that used to occupy the area where we now build a model colony, these Yazata will require a show of force before coming to understand that looking sideways at our people and our efforts will not be tolerated.
I would say they've done more than give us an errant look. They've cost us the lives of our men.
And we will reap a toll on them in the same fashion 100-fold. I will bring their hanging eyesore crashing down to earth, and they will understand the gravity of interference with our mission.
I considered his words carefully. In war, so much of the solemn contemplation over human dignity is thrown from the window. Men become combatants, and combatants become corpses. Children become removable obstructions. Women become prizes. It is the tragedy of conflict. For 2,000 years, European civilization had grappled with this principle and, as of the last century, has made efforts to mitigate the otherwise senseless bloodshed that war so often entails. As we returned to the formation and continued on our way, the sights of the English settlement became more obvious in the distance. I wonder whatever became of those farmers whose ox obstructed our march. Perhaps I should stop in and see the governor. Perhaps not. I mulled the idea over, and to take up quarters within the city would be an imposition on the English without proper notice. They do so detest uninvited guests. In any case, letting the men drink and whore before a battle was something that, historically, impeded performance. Afterwards, we might make time, while I thought up a plan to deal with our little spy problem. Without undue difficulty, we took up tents and settled into camp. No disruptions, no screams, no new fishmen lurking in Moltke's tent. Nothing. A quiet evening breeze before the coming storm. We woke, took in rations in lieu of rolling out the field kitchens to maintain our pace, and continued our march. As morning became afternoon, and afternoon became evening, my binoculars finally filled with a vision of our target. Hanging hundreds of meters above, and some kilometers distant from the coastal road, was Aram. Those lights that had brought my attention to it the first time were all still there. It was at this point that we diverged from the road. While the supply wagons and artillery limbers found it difficult going up the sandstone slopes, we eventually crested the escarpment and took in the view of the soon-to-be-christened battlefield. Once we had stopped the carriage, Moltke and I dismounted to take in the view. One would find best comparison to those troughs and cliffs that are found in the American Grand Canyon, insofar and the size of the thing was concerned. Otherwise, it was just as Moltke had described it. The great hanging formation stood above, and below, a rudimentary settlement. More infrastructure and organization and planning than was observable with the mud huts of the ape men, but less than a proper city. Surrounding it, a flat plateau on which we now stood and took up positions. On Moltke's orders, our dragoner took up flags and began an approach. These banners would act as range markers for when our saturation bombardment began, and would assist the men in their aim should the enemy sally out to greet us. Our engineers and Diesel's engines helped lift the artillery pieces into place and hauled the great crates of shells that would be necessary. Our screening infantry, the 32nd Tanga Askari and the Jägergruppe, began to draw out patrol pickets before affixing stakes and sandbags. Our column moved out and around the circumference of their settlement, slowly closing the noose of a steel gallows.
It is wonderful what a bit of planning ahead can achieve, Your Majesty.
As Moltke spoke, that shadow that followed us on our journey floated above our heads. From it, ropes were dropped and affixed to standing stones with steel hooks, such that our craft would not float away before the time came for the assault. In the distance, a group of dragoner located the entrance of the cave mentioned in the briefing, and a semaphore relay indicated to us that the way was clear. Diesel's engines lumbered off to their mission after a brief inspection by the engineers. All was ready for the dance. We just lacked the music. And then our composer arrived. Kirchbach and the artillery officers stepped down from their carriage, which had trailed behind to ensure that all of the batteries and their ammunition made it safely up the slope. Moltke, viewing the stalactite from his binoculars, passed the optic to Kirchbach, who took in the sights before passing it on to another officer, and then another, and then another. We should have brought more than one pair in the Daimler, in retrospect. With the officers satisfied with the view of their target, they dispersed to their batteries. In prompt order, the cannon that had been wheeled up the slope found their positions behind barricades and sandbags, unlimbered, and took up a ready stance. It would take some time for the assault group to traverse towards the entrance to the cave nearby, and I dispatched a rider to New Kirkwall to inform them of our arrival. Seemed only polite. Having now been sat here for several minutes, an odd murmuring seemed to develop. Looking downward from our elevated position, we could see the little village beneath the stalactite spring into life. I watched through the glass to see men and women going about their lives. I observed with particular interest a group of farmers, presumably, walking out to a paddock full of those large woolen bovines. One of them unlocked a paddock and led a group of them out, tending them with a switch. As he turned up from his work, he must have caught sight of us, indicating by his dropping the switch and running back towards the village. Well, I suppose Moltke's plan never called for any attempt at stealth. A clamour now overtook the village. From my reading of it, this little settlement constituted a hub for their lower classes, pastoralists, apothecaries, and all those professionals that, while not stylish in our own society, were considered almost ostracism-worthy in theirs. Moltke and I gave something of a chuckle when they attempted to raise some manner of alarm. A series of bells began to chime out. It didn't sound like those great bronze bells that our cathedrals featured, more like the bones of a Carib wind chime. Eerie, but not unexpected.
Shall I give the command, sir, or should you take the honor?
I took a seat on the camp stool that an adjutant had deployed while we made our observations. This is your plan, Moltke. The victory shall be yours.
As His Majesty desires.
Glancing down at his timepiece, and then putting it into his breast pocket, he drew his sabre, raised it high, and then brought it low. There's our music, right on cue.